Welcome to episode 36 of Chew on This, a Nerds United podcast. I'm BJ.
Vic. All right, so we have a big announcement at the end of this episode, so please stick around for the very end of this episode. Some big news for us. We're really excited about it, so please stick around for the announcement, which is kind of ironic considering what this episode is about.
Yeah, it is kind of ironic. You'll see the irony at the end.
Okay, so this is our Star Trek Beyond review. So let's see. Let's go a quick recap of the prior JJ Star Treks, which is Star Trek and then Star Trek Into Darkness.
Yes.
So let's just stick with the Rotten Tomatoes rating because it doesn't really matter what they ended up with money wise, because they're not gonna stop making these movies, especially after this one. So Star Trek, the first one, came back at 95%, reboots the entire franchise, and it got me to like Star Trek. It made me actually go back and watch the first two Star Trek movies. Was never really a big Star Trek fan, but I think I've said it in the past before. The reason why I loved the reboot for JJ's Star Trek was because he turned Star Trek into Star Wars, which was basically a lot of gripes with a lot of the Trekkies, that it wasn't a Star Trek movie, and I can completely understand that. Again, the reason why I liked Star Trek, JJ's version, was because he turned it into Star Wars. So that was I think it was 95% for that first one.
Yeah, it was rated really high, and it was a really good movie. And I was really surprised, probably like everyone else, that they were able to take those iconic characters and do something. You know, some of it was different, some of it was the same. Recaptured a lot of the magic that the previous cast had, which was very, very surprising because I was so skeptical about this movie. And then when they got Zachary Quinto, I remember when they announced him at Comic-Con, I was there. When they announced that, people just said, oh, absolutely, he looks the part. And really good, really solid movie that was. Yeah. Really solid.
And this is basically the biggest sense of the word reboot, because they literally rebooted the whole franchise in one movie. They could not have. If you're looking for a reboot, this is the movie for a reboot, because they actually explain why they rebooted it. It's not like Spider-Man when you get like 3 versions of Spider-Man. You're like, well, why do you just keep rebooting it with a different actor? They actually explain why they reboot this movie, like in the movie itself. So if you're tired of reboots that just reboot it for no reason whatsoever, Star Trek JJ's version gives you a reason why they reboot it, and it makes complete sense in the movie itself.
The best Star Trek movies have time travel too.
Yeah, actually, a lot of the better movies have time travel in it, but when it's done right, anyway. So that leads us into Star Trek Into Darkness, and I was kind of surprised that it was 86% on Rotten Tomatoes, because as much as I loved the first movie, I was kind of disappointed in the second movie.
Well, the biggest disappointment was for the longest time, they were denying that Khan was going to be in the movie, which I think it was a huge misstep, because Khan was in the movie and people went, yeah, so, see, why did you have to hide it all this time? So that was a really bad marketing move. And number two, they brought the movie out. It felt like, 4 years after the other one. So you thought, oh man, they had enough time to really develop the story. And then the movie came out and it just did not live up to the potential that I thought it could be. Really, I thought it was a misstep for sure.
Yeah, the whole non-con thing was really stupid. They basically flipped the entire Wrath of Khan thing on its side and reversed roles. Instead of Spock at the end of the movie dying, sacrificing himself, it was Kirk, but he didn't die. So it was kind of like it didn't have the same impact as the Wrath of Khan, which still holds up today. That movie holds up very well still. So it was a big misstep, but still, I guess because of JJ's direction and the quality actors that they got in the movie, it still got an 86%. I guess I held it up to a higher standard after the first movie. I probably would have put it in the 60s or 70s.
Yeah, I was thinking like 75 for me, and that's like generous.
Yeah. So moving on to this weekend, Star Trek Beyond. JJ leaves Star Trek to go to Star Wars, which basically he was kind of already there without the Skywalkers. And they bring in Justin Lin, which for me, not being a Trekkie and not being a huge Star Trek fan, I was skeptical that they got Justin Lin. I would have been like, they got the fucking Fast and Furious guy to do Star Trek? Like, there's nothing smart about those movies, really. Well, actually, that's not true because Fast Five was fucking awesome.
Yeah.
That whole heist at the end, the whole way that they did it was so Ocean's 11 type thing. I loved it. But again, I can understand where people were worried that I'm just going to see a shit ton of, Enterprise ships and stuff like that, or Federation ships just, you know, dragging a fucking safe around
Racing.
space. Yeah.
The thing that came to mind, like when people were watching the trailer, everyone said the same thing. They're like, "There's a fucking motorcycle in Star Trek," and we'll go more into that a little bit later. But spoilers, by the way. So, but yeah, when we saw the motorcycle, I was like, "Oh god," they just couldn't resist. Like it was anything short of like they could have just put a Ferrari in the movie, and people would have been like, "Ah, all right," like it's like Vin Diesel's gonna pop out anytime and race some aliens for the fate of the world or some shit. But he definitely knows how to film action in those movies. I think the one gripe that I probably have for this movie is that the action sometimes is a little muddled. It's really hard to tell what's going on. It reminded me of like the first Transformer movies where you couldn't figure out which robot was fighting who. There was a lot of that. So I was really surprised that the action wasn't really what drew my attention to this movie. It was everything else that was good. And we'll go more into that. But
I think you said something that kind of piqued my thought process, and I should have thought about this first, because when you think Justin Lin and you think about Fast and Furious franchise, all you think about is just straight action. But what he
Yeah.
did, but more importantly, what he did more than anything, in the first movie, there's that character development of Vin Diesel's character Dom, where he talks about family. Lin took that little barbecue thing in there and the couple of speeches that he talked about in there and brought it into the franchise and expanded on it and developed that. And that was something that I didn't really think about until like right now when you said, action and all that stuff, that he's really good at directing and character developing an ensemble cast.
yes.
So, because I actually care about the characters in the Fast and the Furious, and I know how ridiculous those movies are. Like, I'll be the first one that says, like, he drove a sports car through two fucking skyscrapers, like, across the way. Like, that's fucking ridiculous. That's so goddamn ridiculous. Like, because,
But it looks cool though. And you can tell that the characters are like, when they're believing in it, then you believe in it as an audience.
Right.
You're like, oh, cool.
because that's not Star Trek, right? Fast and Furious is not Star Trek. It's not Star
Right.
Wars. It's not fucking Marvel where these people can do superhuman things. But they do things that you're like, so I'm going to get into this Mustang and we're going to drop out of a carrier and just like fucking, on the side of a mountain nonetheless. There's
Like
no
it's no big
steering.
deal.
Yeah, there's no steering in a car like while you're being dropped out of a fucking plane, but I'll be dropped down perfectly onto this like side of a mountain. Like but you suspend disbelief because you care about the character. Like, for me anyway, I care about the characters so
Right.
much.
Right.
So that was the one thing that I never even thought about with Justin Lin, was that he knows how, in my opinion anyway, he knows how to direct and character develop an ensemble cast. And that's important for Star Trek because everybody needs to shine. And Star Trek Beyond does that very well. Even the smallest details about everybody in this movie itself work, and they make you care a lot more about each person.
Yes.
So big kudos to Justin Lin because I fucking love this movie. Everything about this movie, it reminded me of a Star Trek movie, but with way better action than the first two movies of the original series didn't pull off very well. As
Yeah.
good as Wrath of Khan was, there wasn't a ton of action in it. I felt like he took a Star Trek movie and gave it like balls
Yeah.
because
He
there's a
elevated
lot
it
of
for
science
sure.
in this. There's a lot of science in this movie. So you're a bigger Star Trek fan than I am. What did you think about Justin Lin?
I
taking over?
absolutely loved it. I'm really bothered by the 84% on Rotten Tomato right now because I think it's one of their best Star Trek films that they've. I'm going to rank the Star Trek films at the end of the podcast, and I'll tell you where it lands. But it definitely is one of my favorite movies in the Star Trek universe. They really recaptured what Star Trek is, and that's relationships, and then of course all the technical babble and all that shit, which they always do really well. That you believe, you're like, oh yeah, you need to convert the thing to the thing, and that would do it. Yeah, do that.
Yeah, and they
Like
never did that in the first movie, and I think that has a lot to
no,
do with the writer Simon Pegg.
yes, Simon
Simon
Pegg
and what's the
looked
other guy?
well originally. I think the original writers were the same writers the first two, and actually one of the writers was going to direct the third movie, but for whatever reason they pulled the script and they pulled the director. They got Justin Lin, and then Simon Pegg and another dude wrote the movie. And you can tell that Simon Pegg loves Star Trek because it's Star Trek. It like Star Trek Into Darkness for me didn't feel like Star Trek. This felt like Star Trek. It had the humor, it had the action, it had some like holy shit moments, it had some.
Well, he wasn't the only writer on it. He co-wrote this with Doug Jung. Co-wrote this with
With
him.
Oh, that's right. That's right. So they both, you could tell. I'm sorry, I should have get credit where credit's due. They both did a fabulous job of writing this movie and creating an actual Star Trek movie that is very enjoyable. Well, I'll be watching this multiple times and really enjoying it. And it's weird. Someone made a joke on the internet about how the original movies, every even movies is good and the odd movies suck, and then in this franchise all the odd movies are good and the even
Well, so far anyway.
yeah so far.
A little Easter egg in there. Doug Jung actually makes a cameo in the movie. 2 cameos in the movie. He's actually plays. I believe he actually plays Sulu's husband in the movie.
Yes.
So little
Which
Easter egg there.
so let's talk about that for a second. What's the big fucking deal about that, honestly? Like they were
I
talking
didn't
about
have a
that on
problem
the
with it.
internet.
I think the biggest problem is that George Takei had a problem with it. And
That
you
was
couldn't
weird.
find a bigger gay rights activist who is in the media spotlight than George Takei. I think for him is his problem. I think, which I can understand too, is that he played Sulu straight in the original series and didn't want them to change a straight character into a gay character and just wanted a gay character to begin with, like
Okay.
given your own,
Did
which I can
Sulu?
kind of see that. I see his point,
I
but
do.
honestly, from what the second I read that Sulu was going to be gay, I was like, oh fuck, that's an awesome homage to Takai.
Yeah,
Because
I thought so too.
right, because like we just said in the beginning of the podcast that JJ rebooted the entire franchise from the time travel shit. So there's no straight Sulu. Like there could not even there could you know what I mean? Like there's
Telling me
no
that Spock goes back in time and screws everything up, and so Sulu turns gay.
yeah, like there's
It's a gay version of Flashpoint.
like Kirk could have been bisexual in this version. Like it doesn't matter because JJ rebooted the whole thing. So that doesn't really matter. But I thought it was an awesome homage. I see Takai's point,
awesome.
but it was beautifully done in the movie. It was very subtle, and I loved when you first realized that Sulu's gay, but Kirk knew it the whole time, and he just saw a family reuniting after a long
Yes.
journey, and he
It was
just
very
smiled,
touching.
and he looked like he was jealous too, which was awesome, which I thought was great because
Yeah.
there's Sulu, after this long journey, 3 years I think they were out, and they come back to that space station or whatever, and he's greeted there with his husband and their daughter. I think it's daughter, right? Yeah, daughter.
Yes.
And Kirk just looks over, they're embracing, and Kirk looks and has this smile, this beautiful smile where he's like, "That's gorgeous. I'm a little jealous." At least that's what I took it as anyway. Like
Yeah,
that he
no,
doesn't
of course,
didn't have
and
that.
jealous in a way of like, I wish I had that too. Like,
Yeah,
I wish
exactly. Like I had a family to come back
not
to.
like angry jealous, just like
Right.
just kind of like like I wish I had that. He's still
So
like what I like about these movies is you see Kirk developing that confidence that Shatner already had when you first see him in the Star Trek series. Like
yeah, yeah.
they're developing that, and they're developing Spock in such a way that is such a revelation too, because in the original Star Trek, Spock was, it took really, I think, a long time to kind of develop him, kind of turning human a little bit or
It
humanizing
wasn't
him a
until
little bit.
it wasn't until he died actually, or towards it. It started for me. It kind of started in the
The
really
voyage
big.
home.
No, it started even more in the Wrath of Khan for me anyway,
Oh,
and
yeah.
then a little bit in the Search for Spock, which wasn't really good, but for me it started there. And you got to remember that there was a lot of TV shows that happened before the Wrath of Khan, before he
Yeah, like
sacrificed
90
himself.
shows.
Right,
Yeah.
so it took a while, and they're doing it in a way where every movie that they've done so far, they push along. They're like, it's almost like catching up with old friends a little bit in this movie, where like
My
you only need like a couple throwaway lines that make sense for each character.
Yeah, my favorite thing about this movie is the fact that they branched off. They kind of coupled them up, so they branched off into there's different storylines going on. But anytime like Spock was with Bones was my favorite part
Yep. Yeah.
because those two couldn't be a bigger contrast. And yet there's you see the friendship there, and you see the aggravation and frustration, but they care about each other, and
That's all.
it's just
That's all in the writers knowing like, hey, this will be
yeah,
really funny if we keep these two together. You know.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, they did such a bang up job, and that was the other thing too, was a saving grace for me also. Before, even though I was skeptical about Justin Lin directing the movie, I knew how big of a nerd Simon Pegg is.
Yes.
So I was like, oh, he's writing this. I was like, oh, that's fucking awesome. You know, you're gonna get some Star Trek shit in there, and the movie makes me want to go back and watch the TV show just to see if I missed any Easter eggs, because I'm sure I missed a shit ton of Easter eggs in this movie
There's a
that I
ton, man.
yeah that
and
I didn't
and
get.
and he definitely injects a lot of appropriate humor, into it too, which I really enjoyed. Um, so
We should probably say they, since there were two writers.
yeah, yeah, we should. Absolutely. So the plot of the movie actually wasn't too bad. Usually, big popcorn movies, you don't really care too much about the plot. You're just like, whatever. I just want to see action and cool shit and all that stuff. But they actually had a kind of a decent plot about, they're in the middle of their 5-year mission, right? They're like 3 years in. They're tired. Kirk is like wondering why is he doing this? Like he's thinking about quitting and like working at a desk job in a space station. I think
Right.
Spock is thinking about. I like Spock's character in this because they interwove, Leonard Nimoy's death. They interwove that into the movie where Spock he got the news that Spock had died, and that really you see that hurt him big time, and
Oh yeah, I fucking love that.
he's thinking
I
about leaving Starfleet to help the Vulcans, um, help the Vulcans keep their species going and whatnot, like take care of them and all that stuff, and you'd be the ambassador for the Vulcans that the other Spock was, and so it's really hit. I mean, you could see how hard it hit him, especially since like that's him older. It's like, oh shit, I know when I'm going to die now. Like I know, like that. So many multiple things are going on in his head, and that's really tough. But I really really like that that they interwove that in there.
I loved
It's
it when they did the death of Spock in there, or basically Leonard Nimoy. I was like, oh my god, this is such a perfect homage, and it
yes,
worked. It worked for the story though. Like it wasn't forced. Like it wasn't like a giant like fucking Mountain Dew vending machine in the middle of the shot that turns into
right.
an evil robot. I fucking loved it. I
Yeah,
loved.
I was wondering if they were going to do something, and when I saw that, I was like, "Oh my god, that's like it's it's both brilliant and like I think very appropriate. Really like does service to his memory and whatnot. I really really like that, and they
I
spend some
loved.
time on that.
Yeah, I loved even the part at the end when he's trying to still figure out whether or not he wants to be in Starfleet, and you see one of the things that Spock actually kept was was the picture of the entire Enterprise cruise, and it was the old school Enterprise cruise, which was
Yeah,
fucking
it was
awesome.
the undiscovered country picture, I think.
Right? Yeah,
Yeah,
I loved it. Yeah, so yeah, there's so much love done. Like I feel like almost like the writing when for that kind of stuff is almost like when JJ went back and did Star Wars. There was like this love of
Yes.
paying proper
And he and
homage to
JJ's not
things.
even a Star Trek fan. He said
No,
he was
not.
way
He's
more of a
not.
Star Wars fan. So
Yeah, that's
the
why he turned
first,
Star Trek into Star Wars.
yeah, yeah, totally. And I love the first. I mean, don't get me wrong. The first Star Trek is great. It's got so much, humor and action and wonder, and it's multiple viewings. You can watch that movie over and over again. It's got a lot of good stuff in it. This movie, the only gripe I would have would be like the bad guy. I love Idris Elba so much, and so, but he
Yes.
reminded me way too much of the villain in the first movie where Eric Bana played, a Romulan.
Yeah, I got that. I got that a little bit because it was one person going against the entire Starfleet again, or the Federation. So it was a little weird, um, but it kind of worked a little bit. Um,
They definitely made him really menacing. Like he was a bad guy. He was taking people and sucking the life force out of him to keep
yeah,
him like alive,
he was kind of
which
he
was
was
like
maybe
really fucked up.
kind of doing what the Emperor did.
Yeah. Um, so the whole cast is back. Seeing Anton in there, that really kind of broke my heart. It was almost like watching Fast and the Furious and seeing, Paul Walker on the screen.
Yeah, luckily he had a big role in this movie too.
He had a lot bigger role. Yeah,
yeah,
he
and
was with. Was he with Kirk the whole
Kirk.
time?
Yeah, he was
Kirk,
with
yeah,
Kirk
yeah.
the whole time, and they had some good interactions there. It was almost like also like they looked back to the first two movies and like, well, who doesn't get any love? And they kind of just upped the
Yeah,
everybody's.
I think the one person that had less to do would be Uhura, compared to all the rest. Like everyone else had a lot of shit to do.
Yeah, yeah, but she got a lot of love in the first movie.
Yeah, she did. Yeah. But the newcomer, oh my gosh, the female lead, she kicked ass.
She's not really a
She was
newcomer. She's been around.
well, newcomer to the Star Trek franchise, I guess you could say. Because I love the fact that at the end, because she doesn't have family or anything anymore. And I think at the end they go, "Hey, I pulled some strings. We're going to get you in the Starfleet." I was like, "Oh, genius! Like we get to see more of her, in the hopefully in the next movie."
Right.
Which we'll talk about a little bit later on. But yeah, the definitely the cast had a lot of stuff to do. They really paid really well attention to each character. Got to do something. Got to say a funny line. Got to do some sort of action or some sort of set piece. I still think my favorite is the tender moments between like Bones and Spock were my favorite moments.
Yeah, yeah. When he pulls the metal out of his gut.
Yeah. Really good stuff there. You got to see Kirk again develop more and more. I mean, again, he's like kind of overshadowed by his dad still, and he's still struggling to figure out who he is. And you could see that a lot in this movie compared to like Star Trek Into Darkness. They kind of that I don't know, kind of disappeared a little bit that part, but it came back in this movie. He was just kind of like trying to figure out, what am I doing? Like, who am I? What do I want to do with my life and all that stuff? And
Right.
It was great stuff. So the fun of Star Trek is back again. A lot of humor. I think that definitely had some Simon Pegg in it, or possibly the other writer as well.
Well, I think the science in Star Trek is back.
Yeah, the science too.
That was the biggest, I think, gripe with a lot of Star Trek fans, that it was nothing but like blockbuster action stuff, and the science fiction part of it was gone. And I think they brought some of it back. It is still a little action heavy, probably for a lot of true Star Trek fans. But out of the last three movies that have been released, I mean, I would find it hard to find a Star Trek fan who didn't say like that this movie was closest to Star Trek that they've gotten so far since the reboot.
I think you're right. I think Star Trek has never really been action heavy. It's always been about character development and the story.
But you can do both. You can do both.
But
and
but
this
you
one
can,
doesn't.
yeah, if you have the right director and the right writers, you can do both. And it's been proven time and time again. But these new Star Treks definitely have a lot more action. I think because the studios kind of expect that, so that the audience has eye candy or whatever. But it doesn't matter how much special effects you have if the story and the characters are shit. So
Oh, actually, when you said special effects, it reminded me of something I wanted to talk about when I was watching the movie. I saw it in IMAX, like I always see all these big blockbuster movies. I have never seen the destruction of a ship like that before, that took so much care in showing like what it was like watching that ship be destroyed, because
Oh,
the Enterprise has been destroyed many fucking times in movies.
yes.
And other iconic ships have been destroyed too. Like the Batmobile has been destroyed a lot of fucking times in movies. What other big things? I mean, Knight Rider has been fucked up a bunch of times, and Airwolf and all these other iconic ships and stuff like that have been destroyed. Even the Firefly Serenity ship has been messed up a couple of times. But there was something about the way that they filmed this destruction of the Enterprise that seemed like it was somebody. If you went to somebody and was like, you're a Star Trek fan, right? And you were like, you love the Enterprise, you love everything about Star Trek. You're like, well, if I had to destroy the Enterprise, how would I do it? How would I do it without making it seem like every other thing that's ever been destroyed? Like how many times can we watch the White House be destroyed in like a Roland Emmerich movie, right? So,
Right.
but every time it gets destroyed, like you don't give a shit. You know what I mean? It's just a big giant explosion. For some reason, or it's not for some reason, but the way that they did it in this movie, I remember watching it and I was like, oh my god, they took a lot of care in showing the crew members and the ship itself being destroyed and the reaction of the crew members to the ship being destroyed. I was like, wow, this is like a love fest with the Enterprise, and I thought it was done like beautifully.
It was done really amazing. It also reminded me, or like the parallelism between the first movie and this movie. When his dad is essentially, everyone's jumping ship on the pods, and his dad has to stay behind and shoot, keep them off the pods, keep the people, safe and all that stuff. And he ends up
Right.
dying in the Enterprise. It kind of reminded me about a little bit about that
It
because
did remind me of that too. I just thought,
because
but
Kirk stayed to the very end, and then I love that shot when he ejects out of the ship and he watches his beloved ship crash all the way down. It was so like you could just see him. He's just like fuck, like oh my god, my ship. It was
yeah, I
such an
loved it.
awesome shot.
Yeah, I loved that.
Really good scene, and you're like broken hearted. You're like, oh my god, they just fucked that shit up. They tore that ship up so badly, and they were grabbing the pods out of the air, like just snagging all the pods. And Scotty's pod was different though. It like he jumped into that thing and it shot off like lightning. Like
Yeah.
they couldn't capture it. That was kind of cool. They ejected the warp core too, didn't they? Like I thought I saw the warp core being ejected or whatever.
I can't remember. I don't remember off the top of my head right now.
But no, that was beautifully done. You're right. That was a really really good sequence. That was both scary and both like kind of heartbreaking. You're just like, we've seen it destroyed many times, like you said, but not like that. Like they really like that swarm of bees. I think they mentioned later, just tore it up. And you see people flying out into space, and you're like, oh fuck, that's a bad way to go. I hate to die that way. And yeah, I was nutty. I mean, totally nutty. And they go back to the ship later. They go back to the saucer to get something, and that was kind of a cool sequence too. They're running at the top of the ship as it's like tilting, and they're like sliding down. I was like, oh my god, like this has never been done. This is so cool.
Yeah, yeah. It was. There was something about it that just like stood out to me more so than anything about any other ship that I've seen destroyed.
But it was cool. The the woman fighter, she was really super cool. When Scotty comes across her, and you find out that she's not just a warrior, but she's a techie too. Like she's been working on this project that she finds in the mountain, which ends up being an old starship that went missing many, many, many years prior. And so that was pretty cool. You kind of saw that coming, where they were going to get that ship up and running, and that was going to be at the end. Which it still worked. I mean, it was really neat how they got everything put together, and they had to go on a mission to get something to bring back to that ship to get it started. And so that was all cool. And then finally, when the whole crew kind of meets up, like Lord of the Rings, and they all get together and they do the mission, then you're like, okay, cool, like they're back, and now they're going to kick ass. And they actually, like, the way they beat him is actually pretty reasonable too. I guess there's a frequency that controls the swarm, and they were able to break into that frequency, and they play the music really loud, and which was super cool. Like I'm watching the movie, and when they played that song from the first movie, which it's is it Beastie Boys?
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
yeah, they play that song like super loud and all the swarms blowing up. And I was just like, I was rocking out. I was like, oh, this is awesome. And then of course the set piece at the end with Kirk, fighting Idris Elba, who now looks more like Idris Elba because his he doesn't look so alien anymore. It's like wearing off or something like that. No, it was really cool. And I think by the end of that movie, he found himself. He knew where he needed to be, and Spock kind of knew where he needed to be too by the end. And I really liked that. It was like they came full circle within the movie, and I liked that a lot. And all the other supporting characters, did an amazing job. I still love the dynamic between Scotty and his little friend. The little, was it Kevin? He calls him Kevin or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Who, when he throws up acid, I guess, apparently, or sneezes acid.
Yeah, he sneezes. Yeah.
It's pretty funny. But anyway, that's pretty much Star Trek in a nutshell. But
All right, so let's go. Let's do
post
ratings.
credits. Whoa, the post credits though. Hold on.
The
Post credits was when the movie ended, I Googled if Star Trek has a end credits because, like you had mentioned in the Ghostbusters podcast, almost every movie, thanks to Marvel, now has an end sequence of some kind. Of course, I missed the Ghostbusters one because I was just like, oh, I got to get out of here. But it said just stay and wait, and there's a nice tribute. So I stayed and waited for it. It's not even very long at all, and it comes out. But it said something. It dedicated it to Leonard Nimoy and showed his birth date and death and all that stuff. And then it said for Anton, which really got me choked up when I saw that. I was like, oh man, because that just happened recently, so they were able to add that to the end really quickly.
Right.
So yeah, and it overall though, I mean, we'll go into our ratings now. I'm gonna have to give it. Maybe this is being a little generous, but I'd have to say 4.5 chainsaws for me.
Okay.
Because I thoroughly enjoyed it. And then as far as the diversity ratings go, this is kind of a difficult one. I'd say Jan Brady. I mean, because it's Star Trek. They have. I mean, there's
Really?
They had a. I think so. I don't think it was a plethora. Do you, or do you think it was more Casper?
I'm gonna go. No, definitely not Casper. Well, for the movie rating, I think I'm gonna go 4. 4 stars.
Okay.
Not 4 stars. 4 lightsabers. I can't think of a reason why not to give it 5. I as much as I love the movie, there's just something preventing me from giving it 5 stars. Like it wasn't.
Yeah.
And here's my defense for that is I didn't walk out of it like I did in Civil War. Like 5 lightsabers for Civil War, I didn't walk out the same way that I did for Star Trek. So I'm gonna give it 4, and I still love the movie. I'm sure maybe my rating will change later, but I'm gonna give it 4 lightsabers. And as far as my diversity goes, it'll be my first plethora, because Star Trek has always been on the forefront of being diverse, or being normal, I should say. And it took it to another level here where the main villain was a black guy, and they made Sulu gay, which was homage again to George Takei. But if you look at the cast itself, it's they have everything there. I guess the only thing they don't have is like an Indian guy there, but I'm sure like if you looked at the Federation stuff,
I guess you're right there. I forgot about the John Cho thing, and also the female. Because when folks, when we talk diversity, we're not talking just race. We're talking gender. We're talking
we're talking everything and
everything.
They basically. I mean, for me, they don't have to hit. I want to kill your birds. By the way, they don't. They don't have to hit every single diversity note, right? They don't have to have. There's not a checklist for me where it's like it has to have all these things in there, but it has to have a good amount of diversity in it. Like for Ghostbusters, for me, I gave it to Jan Brady because it was glaring to me that they were sitting above a Chinese restaurant. There was no Asian guys there or Asian women. Like that was weird to me. So
that was weird.
And like for Master of None, that's a fucking plethora right there. They nailed everything there. And for Star Trek, they basically got the gambit almost, So for me, it's a plethora. It doesn't have to hit every single thing. It just has to come close to it for me to be a plethora where it's not just whitewashed the entire thing. So
Right.
for
I
me,
could
for
see
me,
that.
for me, it's plethora for that.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, okay, so those are our ratings. Now I'm going to go into just something really quickly. I know you didn't do this, but I
Well,
wanted
I
to do
didn't
it
do it
because
because I didn't watch all of them, so
yeah, exactly.
I
Right.
couldn't do it.
I've seen every single movie multiple times. So there are now 13 Star Trek movies,
That's
and
a
I'm just
fuck.
going to go
This is like Friday the 13th territory.
yeah, exactly. But not as bad. So yeah, there's now 13 movies. They started back in the 70s all the way till today. So this is going on. I think they just celebrated their 50th year, actually, of Star Trek,
Right.
which is pretty crazy. But yeah, so 13 movies. I'm going to go from 13 all the way to my number one pick. Okay. So 13 I'm going to begin by saying Final Frontier, I think, is the worst Star Trek movie. For many reasons. One, I think William Shatner himself directed that. It basically was fighting Jesus at the end, almost, or would have been fighting Jesus at the end had they done the original script. That's where I read somewhere. Number 12, Nemesis, which was a Next Generation movie. It was their last one. It was the one that pretty much killed the franchise for a long time until JJ brought it back. Not a good movie. The first Star Trek movie would be number 11. That's the Star Trek The Motion Picture.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, if you go back and watch it, it's pretty freaking boring. And there's long shots of like the Enterprise ship. That's it. Just long shots of it, of them
I think that's
watching
all they
it.
could. I think that's all they could afford.
That's all they could afford, right? But still, it's okay. Number 10 for me would be Star Trek 9, which would be Insurrection. Again, that's another Next Generation movie. The Next Generation movies kind of started out not great, and then they peaked with one movie, and then they went down again. And that's when they started going down again as an Insurrection. Number 9, I would say Generations. That's when they combined the two franchises, the old and the new, a little bit. Mm-hmm. They brought Kirk back. That was total fan service. Number 6 would be Star Trek Into Darkness. Sorry, I just totally skipped. Generations, number 9, sorry. Number 8 would be Search for Spock. That was kind of one of the weaker old generation ones. Still is okay, but it was kind of the weaker one. Number 7 would be Undiscovered Country. That was the last one of the old crew. Number 6 would be Star Trek Into Darkness. Number 5, The Voyage Home. That was one of my favorites for a really long time with the whales and all that stuff, the time traveling.
Yeah, I really like that one.
So number 4, I would have to put Star Trek Beyond at number 4. I really enjoyed this movie. Number 3, the first Star Trek reboot. Number 2, Wrath of Khan.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and number 1, I have to say, was my favorite Star Trek film, just edging out Wrath of Khan a little bit, would be First Contact, which is the first real Next Generation film that involved time travel and the Borg.
Tom Hardy was in that one.
I loved that movie. No, Tom Hardy was in Nemesis.
Oh, okay. I thought it was First Contact.
No, First Contact is such a good film, and Wrath of Khan is a near perfect film too. So that was really hard for me at the end. I had to think what would edge out Wrath of Khan, and First Contact has a little bit more going for it than Wrath of Khan did, and it holds up too if you in multiple viewings. So. But that would be my ranking system. I don't know if some people out there would be like, no, Wrath of Khan is The Empire Strikes Back. It's the best film. And it is. It's so freaking good. But I thought First Contact was a little bit better.
Interesting.
So now I want to end really quickly before I go into an announcement. But they were talking about, before this movie even came out, they greenlit another movie. And JJ has come out saying some really interesting rumors about how he would like to do a time travel movie.
I thought it was already set in stone that Chris Hemsworth was signed on for the next movie.
I have no, maybe that's new, that's brand new, but like from what I read, like not even a week ago, they were talking about how he would like to have this Kirk meet his dad, in some time traveling scenario, which I thought was really interesting because the journey that Kirk goes on through all the movies recently is that he's living in his dad's shadow, and he's like trying to figure out, like, basically his dad did it because he loves Starfleet, and he did it because on a dare to be in Starfleet. So it's he's still trying to figure himself out, and I think it'd be a really good, like, full rounded, character development thing if they kind of went that route. But I don't know what that story would be like. I mean, you can't do another voyage home. It's got to be something a little bit different. Maybe a Flashpoint kind of thing. I don't know. So, but anyway, that's Star Trek Beyond in a nutshell, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I'm a little wary about the time travel again and bringing back Chris Hemsworth only after 4 movies or 3 movies. So, I mean, they did tease it in this one. The whole trailer, the whole first trailer is about Kirk and his dad. So they did tease it. Yeah. So, we'll see. I mean, if Peg and Jung are still writing the movie and Lynn's directing, then they got my street cred.
Sign me up. I'm in.
Yeah, they got my street cred from this movie. So,
yeah, for sure.
So the ironic big announcement that we have. Go ahead. This is huge.
Yes. So something happened. I'd say about a month ago. Not really something happened, but I just kind of had this idea of, like, I've been wanting to go to Rancho Obi-Wan for a really long time since they opened up, I think like 3 or 4 years ago. And I've been a big fan of Steve Sansweet's for a really long time. When I first saw him at, I want to say it was Celebration 1 or 2. I can't remember. It was a long time ago. And I just fascinated because he is the number one, I guess, private collector of Star Wars memorabilia than anyone else on the planet. Like over 300,000 items.
Right. Like he holds the Guinness Book of World Records for it.
Yes, Guinness. He's actually in the book. So that's really super cool. So when I heard that he opened his own museum, I thought, oh my God, this is genius. I want to go so badly. And it's not that far from me. It's in Petaluma, California. I think I'm like 4.5 hours away. You're, I think, half that away. So anyway, I said, wouldn't it be cool if we went and visited the ranch or visited the museum and then podcasted about it? And then I kind of went a little step further and thought, well, wait, maybe let me see if we can maybe get him. That would be really cool if we can get him to come on our podcast and interview. And I know he's done interviews before, but not on our podcast. We're a cool bunch. Anyway, no, not to knock in the other podcast. But anyway, so we wanted him on here. So I reached out to his representatives. Thank you, Cody Stark, for giving us the info. But I reached out and they said yes. And so we're going to be going to Rancho Obi-Wan in the next couple of weeks, and we're going to get to sit down with Steve Sansweet. So we're going to have a big podcast about our experience walking around Rancho Obi-Wan, and then to put the awesome Star Wars nail in the coffin, so to speak, we're going to be able to interview Steve Sansweet and ask him some chew on this questions. And so very, very excited about that. So look forward to that in the coming weeks. We have some more reviews.
That'll be in 2 weeks. The podcast will get released on August 8th. So look out for that.
August 8th. Yeah, which is going to be, again, this week is unusual. We have 2 podcasts. I think that week we might even have 2 because I think Suicide Squad comes out that Friday. But next week, I think we're talking, I don't know, maybe Jason Bourne. So we have some really good stuff coming up, but look forward to that. And we'll mention it again, and we'll advertise the hell out of that, because that's very, very exciting for 2 huge Star Wars nerds to meet Steve in that capacity. So we really look forward to that. We hope you guys will enjoy that as well. But yeah, anything else you want to add?
No, I think that's it. I mean, for us, this is for the Star Wars fans that we are. This is, other than because Steve is like us, right? He just happens to be famous.
Yes.
He buys all the toys, gets everything, and now he gets more shit than he ever could imagine to open a museum. My shit just fits in my garage. So, but yeah, I mean, the museum, going to the museum itself is going to be awesome. Like, I can't wait to see some of the toys that I grew up with and destroyed. And I want to probably kill myself at the end of the tour for doing such things. Like,
big time. I remember, like, oh my God, I could be a multi-millionaire with all these toys. I could be the 40-year-old virgin. God damn it.
Yeah, I remember chewing on Darth Vader's lightsaber as a kid. I remember
You're like,
just
I
sitting
remember
there.
I swallowed Boba Fett's rocket.
I remember like just sitting there. Back in the day, this lightsabers used to come out of the hand, and it had this like little niblet at the end of it. There's like little
Yep.
lightsaber nipple. And I remember watching TV. I don't remember what I was watching, but I remember I was watching TV, standing there, sitting there in the couch, laying down, and had Darth Vader's lightsaber in my hand, in my mouth, just chewing on it like it was like a toothpick or something.
Well, recently, like I was watching Mark Hamill, because he's been all over the place from Celebration to Comic Con, or I don't know if he went to Comic Con, but he's been all over the place. And he was talking about, telling people, please take your toys out of the boxes and play with them. And so you kind of went a step further and you actually started chewing them. So kudos to you.
Yeah.
But anyway, some really good stuff to look forward to, guys. But that was our Star Trek Beyond review. So that's episode 36 of Chew on This, a Nerds United podcast. I'm BJ.
Vic.
Until next time, folks, chew on that.
Later.